The studio lights burned bright, casting a warm glow over the sleek set of Jimmy Kimmel's talk show. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their chatter a low hum as the band played a jazzy riff to signal the start of the segment. Gwen Stefani, SAT poised on the guest couch, her signature platinum blonde hair pulled into a high ponytail. Her red lipstick a stark contrast against her pale skin. She wore a tailored black blazer over a white silk blouse, exuding confidence, but her eyes darted briefly to the side, betraying a flicker of unease. Jimmy Kimmel, leaning back in his chair, flashed his trademark grin, the one that could disarm even the most guarded guest. Tonight, though, the air felt heavier than usual, charged with an undercurrent neither the audience nor the viewers at home could quite pinpoint. Jimmy launched into his opening banter, tossing out lighthearted jabs about Gwen's latest fashion line, her Las Vegas residency, and her role on The Voice. The audience laughed on cue, but Gwen's smile tightened, her fingers adjusting the cuff of her blazer. She responded with her usual charm, her voice carrying that familiar mix of California cool and seasoned pop star polish. "You know, Jimmy, I'm just trying to keep it real, keep creating, keep pushing," she said, leaning forward slightly, her tone warm but measured. The crowd clapped, eating it up, but Jimmy, ever the provocateur, wasn't content to let the segment coast on pleasantries. He leaned in, his grin widening, and pivoted to a topic that had been making waves online. "So, Gwen, there's been a lot of chatter about your new single," he said, his voice casual but pointed. "Some folks are saying it's a departure, maybe too experimental for your core fans. Others are calling it a bold move. What's the real story behind it?" The question hung in the air, and the audience leaned in, sensing the shift. Gwen's smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered, tilting her head with a practiced laugh. "Well, Jimmy, art's about taking risks, you know. I've never been one to play it safe." Her response was smooth, but there was a slight edge to her voice, a hint of defensiveness that didn't go unnoticed. Jimmy, sensing an opening, pressed further. "Sure, but there's this one critic, I think it was in Rolling Stone, who said it felt like you were trying to chase trends rather than set them. That's gotta sting, right?" The audience let out a collective ooh, and Gwen's posture stiffened. She crossed her legs, her stiletto tapping lightly against the floor. "I don't really read reviews, Jimmy," she said, her tone cooler now. "I make music for me, for my fans, not for some guy with a laptop and an opinion." The crowd erupted in applause, but there was a tension in her delivery, a spark that suggested she wasn't as unbothered as she claimed. The conversation veered into safer territory for a moment, with Jimmy asking about her collaboration with Blake Shelton, her partner, and their life together. Gwen loosened up, sharing a funny story about Blake's attempt to cook her favorite vegan dish, which had the audience roaring. But Jimmy, never one to let a segment stay too comfortable, circled back to the music. "So this new sound, it's got some electronic vibes a little darker than what we're used to from you. Is this Gwen reinventing herself again, or is it something else? Like, are you trying to prove something?" His tone was playful, but the question landed like a jab. Gwen's eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned back, folding her arms. "Prove something, Jimmy. I've been in this game for decades. I don't need to prove anything to anybody." Her voice was steady, but there was a fire behind it, a warning. The audience clapped, but it was more hesitant now, sensing the shift. Jimmy, undeterred, chuckled and said, okay, but you gotta admit, it's a bold move to go so far from your no-doubt roots. Some fans are wondering if you're leaving that skopunk girl behind for good." The question wasn't just a question, it was a challenge, and Gwen's expression made it clear she wasn't here for it. The studio lights seemed to sharpen, catching the glint in Gwen Stefani's eyes as she stared at Jimmy Kimmel. Her stiletto stopped tapping, and for a moment, the air felt still, the audience holding its breath. "Leaving the skopunk girl behind," she repeated, her voice low, deliberate, each word carrying a weight that cut through the room's earlier levity. "Jimmy, that girl's still in me. She's always been in me. You don't just erase where you came from." Her tone wasn't angry, not yet, but it was firm, a line drawn in the sand. The audience murmured, some clapping in support, others shifting uncomfortably, unsure where this was headed. Jimmy, sensing the tension but still playing to the crowd, leaned forward with that boyish grin, trying to keep things light. No, I get it, Gwen. No doubt's a legend, right? But this new sound, it's got people talking, wondering if you're trying to be, I don't know, the next Billie Eilish or something." The audience laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, scattered. Gwen's lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers tightening around the armrest of the couch. She tilted her head, her ponytail swaying slightly, and let out a short, sharp laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Billie's great. She's doing her thing," Gwen said, her voice measured but laced with an edge that made the room feel smaller. "But I'm not chasing anybody's sound. I'm Gwen Stefani. I've been doing this since before half these new artists were born." The crowd erupted, some standing to cheer, feeding off her defiance. But Jimmy, ever the showman, saw an opportunity to dig deeper. "Okay, fair. You're an icon. No question, he said, raising his hands as if to concede. But let's talk about the fans. There's this whole thread online. Thousands of comments, saying they miss the old Gwen, the hollaback girl energy. What do you say to them? Gwen's posture shifted, her shoulders squaring as if bracing for impact. I say they should listen to the new album with an open mind, she replied, her voice steady but her eyes locked on Jimmy's, unblinking. I'm not here to make the same album over and over. That's not growth, that's not art. The audience clapped, but there was a restlessness now, a sense that the conversation was teetering on the edge of something raw. Jimmy nodded, his grin fading slightly, and leaned back, tapping his pen on the desk. Growth. I hear you. But some folks are saying it's less about growth and more about, I don't know, trying to stay relevant in a crowded industry. That's gotta be tough, right? The word relevant landed like a spark in dry grass. Gwen's jaw tightened, and she uncrossed her legs, leaning forward now, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Relevant, she said, her voice rising just enough to make the audience lean in. Jimmy, I've been relevant for 30 years. I don't need to try. I'm still here because I love what I do, because I've got something to say. Her words were sharp, not yelling but cutting, each syllable deliberate. The crowd roared, but there was a split in their energy. Some cheering her fire, others sensing the interview was veering into dangerous territory. Jimmy, perhaps realizing he'd pushed too far, tried to pivot. All right, let's switch gears, he said, chuckling, but the laugh sounded forced. Let's talk about something fun, your Vegas show. You're killing it out there, right? But Gwen wasn't ready to let it go. She leaned back, her arms crossed again, her expression a mix of defiance and exhaustion. You know, Jimmy, it's funny, she said, her voice quieter now, but no less intense. People always want to put you in a box, tell you who you're supposed to be. I'm not here for that. Not tonight, not ever. The audience fell silent, hanging on her words, as the camera zoomed in, catching the fire in her eyes. The silence in the studio stretched, thick and heavy, as Gwen Stefani's words hung in the air. The camera lingered on her face, her eyes still locked on Jimmy Kimmel, unyielding, her expression a mix of resolve and something deeper, almost wounded. The audience, caught in the moment, seemed to hold its collective breath, their earlier cheers replaced by a tense stillness. Jimmy, usually quick with a quip to diffuse any awkwardness, seemed momentarily thrown, his fingers pausing mid-tap on the desk. He cleared his throat, forcing a smile, but it didn't quite land. Okay, Gwen, I hear you, he said, his voice softer now, as if trying to steer the ship back to safer waters. Let's talk about Vegas. Then, tell us about the energy there, the fans. Gwen didn't move, her arms still crossed, her posture rigid. For a moment, it seemed she might let the subject change, let the tension dissolve into the usual talk show pleasantries. But then she leaned forward, her voice low but steady, carrying a weight that made the room feel smaller. You know what, Jimmy? I'm not sure I want to talk about Vegas right now, she said, each word deliberate, her gaze unwavering. I came here to talk about my work, my music, but it feels like you're more interested in stirring things up than hearing me out. The audience gasped softly, a ripple of shock moving through the crowd. This wasn't the scripted banter they were used to. Jimmy's smile faltered, his eyes flicking briefly to the side, likely toward a producer off stage. He leaned back, trying to regain control. Whoa, Gwen, I'm just asking what the fans are asking, he said, raising his hands in a mock surrender, his tone still light but tinged with unease. We love you here, you know that. I'm just playing devil's advocate. But Gwen wasn't buying it. She shook her head slightly, her ponytail swaying, and let out a short, humorless laugh. Devil's advocate. Jimmy, I've been dealing with people questioning my choices my whole career. I don't need it dressed up as a game. The crowd stirred, some clapping in support, others whispering to each other, sensing the interview was unraveling. Gwen's voice grew sharper, not loud but piercing, cutting through the studio's polished atmosphere. I'm out here pouring my heart into my music, my shows, my life, and all anyone wants to talk about is whether I'm still the girl from the 90s or if I'm trying to be someone else. Maybe the real question is why people are so afraid of me evolving. Her words landed like a challenge, and the audience erupted, a mix of cheers and uneasy murmurs. She wasn't just talking to Jimmy now, she was talking to everyone, the critics, the fans, the industry itself. Jimmy, clearly caught off guard, tried to pivot again, his voice taking on a conciliatory tone. All right, I get it, Gwen. You're evolving. You're pushing boundaries. That's what makes you you. Let's talk about what's next. What's exciting you right now? But Gwen's expression didn't soften. She leaned back, her hands now resting in her lap, but her fingers were still, no longer fidgeting. What's exciting me? She said, her voice quieter now, but no less intense. What's exciting me is being true to myself, even when people don't get it, even when they try to twist it into something it's not. The audience clapped again, but it was fragmented, some fully behind her, others unsure how to react to the rawness of the moment. The camera panned to Jimmy, whose grin was now more of a grimace, his eyes darting to the side again, likely signaling for a commercial break. But Gwen wasn't done. She tilted her head, her voice dropping to a near whisper, but every word carried. You want to know what's next? Jimmy, maybe it's me walking away from conversations that don't respect what I'm trying to do. The studio fell silent again, the weight of her words sinking in, as the screen faded to black for a break. The studio lights flickered back on as the show returned from the commercial break, but the atmosphere had shifted, charged with an unspoken tension that clung to the air. The audience, still processing Gwen Stefani's last words, sat quieter. Now, their earlier enthusiasm tempered by the raw edge of the exchange. Gwen remained on the guest couch, her posture unchanged, arms crossed, her face a mask of controlled intensity, her eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on some point beyond. Jimmy Kimmel, as if she were already halfway out the door. Jimmy, back at his desk, adjusted his tie, his usual easy grin replaced by a more cautious smile, one that didn't quite hide the unease in his eyes. The band played a brief, upbeat riff to signal the segment's return, but it felt out of place. Like laughter at a funeral. Jimmy leaned forward, his voice softer now, almost All right, we're back with Gwen Stefani, and, wow, we're getting real tonight, aren't we? He said, trying to inject some levity, but the audience's response was tepid, a few scattered claps. He cleared his throat, glancing at his note cards, clearly searching for a way to reset the conversation. Gwen, you were talking about staying true to yourself, and I think we all respect that. Let's talk about something positive, your creative process. What inspires you these days? It was a safe question, a lifeline thrown to pull the interview back to familiar territory. Gwen's gaze flicked back to him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed she might take the bait, ease into the softer topic, but then she tilted her head, her red lips parting slightly as she spoke, her voice low and deliberate. You know, Jimmy, I came here ready to talk about my work, my inspiration, all of it. But it's hard to do that when every question feels like a trap. The audience stirred, a low murmur rippling through the crowd. Jimmy's smile froze, his fingers tightening around his pen. A trap? He said, forcing a chuckle. Come on, Gwen, I'm just asking what the fans want to know. Fans, Gwen cut in, her voice sharper now, though still controlled, were the people who want to pick apart every move I make. There's a difference, Jimmy, she uncrossed, her arms, leaning forward, her hands resting on her knees, her stiletto tapping once, twice, against the floor. I'm inspired by my life, my kids, my love, my mistakes. But I'm not here to justify that to anyone, not even you. The audience erupted, some cheering her defiance, others shifting uncomfortably, caught in the crossfire of her words. The camera zoomed in, capturing the fire in her eyes, the way her jaw set with quiet resolve. Jimmy, clearly rattled but still clinging to his host instincts, tried to pivot. Okay, I hear you, Gwen. Let's talk about your kids, then. You've said they're a big part of your creative spark. But Gwen shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible motion, her voice cutting through before he could finish. No, Jimmy, I'm not doing this. The words landed like a thunderclap, and the studio fell silent, the audience frozen, the crew off stage exchanging wide-eyed glances. Gwen's hands moved to the edge of the couch, as if bracing herself. I came here to share something real, but this feels like a game I didn't sign up for. Jimmy's face flushed, his smile gone entirely now. Gwen, come on, we're just talking, he said, his voice strained, a mix of confusion and desperation. But Gwen was already moving, unclipping the microphone from her blazer with a swift, practiced motion. I'm done talking, she said, her voice steady but final, as she stood, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The audience gasped, some clapping, others whispering, as she turned, her ponytail swinging, and walked toward the wings, leaving Jimmy staring after her, the camera panning to catch the stunned look on his face as the screen cut to black again. The screen flickered back to life, the studio lights casting their relentless glow over an empty guest couch where Gwen Stefani had been moments before. The audience sat in stunned silence, their murmurs barely audible as the camera panned Jimmy Kimmel, who leaned back in his chair, his face a mix of shock and forced composure. The band, caught off guard, hadn't started their usual upbeat transition, leaving an eerie quiet in the air. Jimmy ran a hand through his hair, his usual polish cracking as he forced a laugh, looking out at the audience. Well, folks, that's a first, he said, his voice betraying a hint of unease. Guess Gwen had somewhere to be. The crowd offered a few scattered laughs, but the energy was off. The room buzzing with the weight of what had just happened. Offstage, the chaos was palpable. Producers huddled in the wings, their headsets crackling with urgent whispers, as crew members darted about, unsure whether to prep for the next segment or brace for fallout. Gwen's heels echoed faintly down a backstage hallway, her figure, already out of sight, but the impact of her exit lingered like a storm cloud. The camera cut to a wide shot of the set, the empty couch glaring under the lights, a stark reminder of the moment that had just unfolded. Jimmy, still trying to salvage the segment, leaned forward, his grin returning but strained. "All right, let's keep this moving. We've got a great show tonight, folks. Up next, we'll talk to our next guest." But, wow, that was something, huh? The audience clapped, but it was half-hearted, their attention still fixed on the drama that had just played out. Social media was already lighting up, though the studio crowd couldn't know it yet. Posts and clips of Gwen's walkout spreading like wildfire, fans and critics alike dissecting every word, every glance. Back on set, Jimmy shuffled his note, curds his fingers fumbling slightly, and launched into a segue about the next guest, a comedian known for lighthearted bits. But the transition felt jarring, the audience still reeling, their whispers growing louder as they leaned toward each other, piecing together what they'd just witnessed. Somewhere, backstage, Gwen moved swiftly through the maze of corridors, her face set in a hard line, her team trailing a few steps behind. Her manager, a wiry man in a dark suit, was already on his phone, fielding calls, his voice low and urgent. Gwen didn't slow down, her stilettos clicking against the concrete floor, her blazer catching the dim light of the hallway. She pushed through a heavy door, into a quieter space, a small green room, and stopped, her hands on her hips, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "I'm not doing this anymore," she said, more to herself than to anyone else, her voice low but fierce. Her assistant, hovering nearby, nodded silently, unsure whether to speak. The room was a stark contrast to the bright chaos of the set, its walls lined with framed photos of past guests, a couch that looked barely used, a table scattered with water bottles and half-eaten snacks. Gwen paced, her ponytail swaying, her mind clearly racing. She wasn't angry, not exactly, it was something deeper, a frustration that had been building, not just from tonight but from years of questions that felt like accusations, from the constant demand to justify her art, her choices, her existence in an industry that loved to tear down what it built up. She stopped pacing, her eyes catching her reflection in a small mirror on the wall, and for a moment, she just stared, as if seeing herself anew. Back on set, Jimmy was powering through, his banter with the comedian landing well enough to pull the audience back, but the shadow of Gwen's exit loomed. The camera caught a few audience members glancing toward the wings, as if hoping she'd return, but the show had to go on. Jimmy cracked a joke, the crowd laughed, and the segment rolled forward. But the energy was different now, fractured, the night marked by a moment no one had seen coming. In the dim light of the green room, Gwen Stefani stood still, her reflection staring back from the small mirror, her eyes tracing the lines of a face that had carried her through decades of scrutiny, reinvention, and triumph. The faint hum of the air conditioning was the only sound, a stark contrast to the electric chaos of the stage she'd left behind. Her assistant lingered by the door, clutching a tablet, her expression a mix of concern and readiness, while her manager's voice, still on the phone, drifted in from the hallway, a low murmur of damage control. Gwen's hands dropped from her hips, her shoulders loosening slightly, as if the weight of the moment was settling into something else, resolve, clarity, or maybe just exhaustion. She turned away from the mirror, her voice quiet but firm. "Let's go," she said, grabbing her bag from the couch, her heels clicking as she headed for the exit. Outside the studio, the Los Angeles night was warm, the city's pulse thrumming beyond the lot where a black SUV waited. Gwen slid into the back seat, her team following, the door shutting with a soft thud that felt final. As the car pulled away, she leaned her head against the window, the glow of streetlights flickering across her face. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications piling up, texts from friends, her publicist, even Blake, but she didn't look. Instead, she stared out at the city, her mind replaying the night, not with regret but with a kind of fierce certainty. She'd walked away, not because she couldn't handle it, but because she didn't have to anymore. Back in the studio, Jimmy Kimmel wrapped the show, his charm back in place but strained, the audience's laughter a little too eager, as if trying to erase the earlier tension. The cameras cut, the lights dimmed, and the crowd filed out, their conversations buzzing with speculation, some praising Gwen's boldness, others debating if she'd overreacted. The crew swept the set, resetting for the next night, but the empty guest couch lingered in their minds, a silent testament to the clash that had unfolded. Jimmy lingered at his desk, chatting with the producer, his usual ease tempered by a flicker of unease, knowing the moment would follow him online. In headlines, in the endless churn of public opinion. By morning, the internet was ablaze. Clips of Gwen's walkout dominated social media, dissected by fans, critics, and talk show pundits. Some called it a diva move, others a stand for authenticity, the debate splitting along lines of loyalty and expectation. Fan accounts posted montages of Gwen's career, from No Doubt's raw energy to her solo reinventions, framing her exit as a refusal to be boxed in. Critics, meanwhile, spun narratives of a star struggling to stay relevant, their words, sharp but predictable. Gwen, still offline, didn't see the posts, but she didn't need to. She'd lived this cycle before. the praise, the criticism, the noise. In the quiet of her home, Gwen sat at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee, untouched, in front of her. The morning light filtered through the windows, catching the edges of her platinum hair. She wasn't thinking about the show anymore, or the headlines, or the endless chatter. She was thinking about her music, the songs she'd poured herself into, the ones that would outlast this moment. Her kids' laughter echoed from another room, grounding her, and for the first time that night, she smiled. Small but real. She'd walked away, not to end something, but to protect what mattered, her art, her truth, her peace. The world would keep talking, dissecting her words, her walk, her fire. But Gwen was already moving forward, her focus back on creating, on the next note, the next stage. The clash with Jimmy was just a moment, a spark in a career built on resilience. She'd returned to the spotlight on her terms, not because she had to prove anything, but because she still had something to say. And, somewhere, in the quiet of that morning, she knew her fans, the ones who got it, were waiting to hear it.